I grew up in the Camargue, and the influence of the Camargue is really major on the definition of the LUMA project. It is central to it. We were able to host the program of Atelier LUMA within our campus while we were working on the construction of all the other elements of the campus. And it became also important that Atelier LUMA, after the research phase, would have its own center. And the center is at the center of the campus.
I think the building never will be finished. Everything is almost designed as an open frame, as a grid.
This new building was born organically, the same way that in nature things can be born.
Atelier LUMA became a little bit assembled. Atelier LUMA became a little bit BC. So we incorporated also these genes, and this narrative also became part of our existence as organization, as group of people, because we were literally living together and working together to make it.
One of the complexities of the project is that we're based in London, and then there's another architect, BC, who are working on it from Brussels. And then really there's the Atelier themselves, who are based here, who are also designers, who are working on it in Arles. And so there's 3 different languages there. And I think in a way, what's nice about prototypes and the way in which we've been working through this as a project, which is making large-scale models and then one-to-one prototypes, I think it's much easier to communicate, because it just seems much more universal. It's just much easier to be able to point at something and say, we think, this is how we made it, we think this is a good way of making it, and someone else to share an opinion. And for sure, a lot of the complexities are when things are just drawn, or there's emails in different languages and stuff, and you're not completely sure, even when you have a conversation with someone, you're not completely sure that they understand what you're saying. But obviously when something's made and you're both looking at it, then there's absolutely no confusion.
Atelier LUMA is all about materials, and to try and work in 3D renderings and computer drawings and things is quite an absurd way of trying to communicate what the feeling of the space is going to be like, because all of these materials that are being developed that have such an amazing kind of quality when you look at them closely or touch them, and they're things that you just can't really represent in digital drawing. It has to be experienced in reality.
At the same time, there's people who are building it, there's people who are still designing it, and there are people who are using it.
On a eu plusieurs casquettes, en tout cas nous, Atelier LUMA, dans ce projet, parce qu'on est à la fois le futur utilisateur du lieu, mais on a participé à la co-conception, on va dire, avec BC et Assemble, qui sont venus sous forme de résidence, et qu'il n'y avait même pas de programme en fait, défini au tout début en fait, de ce projet. Donc on a presque fait la programmation ensemble, puis la conception ensemble, et même le développement des matériaux en partie ensemble.
Ce
qui est intéressant avec le prototypage, c'est qu'il a lieu sur le site avec les mêmes ressources et qu'il a évolué dans le temps. Et donc nous, en découvrant par exemple cette poutre de pierre, là, ces résidus de pierre qu'on a trouvé dans les carrières pour en faire un pisé, on a, dès les premières résidences, avant même de dessiner le projet, commencé à prototyper, faire des petits tests de pisé par l'intermédiaire de BC Materials pour savoir quelles étaient les propriétés de ce matériau qu'on a découvert. Ce matériau, il est rapidement devenu intéressant et plutôt que de développer nous-mêmes des prototypes qui resteraient à une échelle, disons, très expérimentale, c'est là qu'on a fait tout de suite intervenir des artisans locaux capables d'amener ces prototypes à d'autres échelles.
At the base of all that is not just looking at materials such as, well, there's a concrete manufacturer over there or there's a brick manufacturer over there. It's looking at kind of what is like undervalued, what is being thrown away, what has been wasted.
I think being here, and that's also linked to the fact of working really with locally, regionally and geographically linked materials to the region. There's part of the work that Atelier LUMA already provided and has a network connected to the materials they had already researched. So it's really about learning from each other at those initial stages. And it added a very evolutive kind of process, which still today everything is evolving continuously, because of course you're prototyping, you're testing, discovering new things.
You know, ordinarily that would mean we've given some drawings to the builders and the builders are building it and we go to site and we check their work. But the idea in this project from the beginning has been to make space during the time that the project is on site for different kinds of kind of development across various aspects. So BC are doing workshops around kind of rammed earth and Pise with quite a lot of people on site at the moment. And then Maria and I are looking at stone in quarries around the region, looking at making some kind of products and interior elements. It all needs to be prototyped in order to understand that it will work or how it will react, and that's kind of different to most building processes where you understand all the products that you're putting together to be inert and mostly inorganic. So prototyping plays a role in just sort of developing the knowledge further to make sure that you understand the choices and decisions you're making.
And also there's a kind of going back to that idea of control. I guess we're all quite interested in the history of architecture, and obviously there's the Gothic principles where, you know, that might be built over hundreds of years and there is some kind of drawing, but then it's up to the craftsman to really adapt it and develop it. And there's a kind of multi-generational effort because there's a kind of, there is an infrastructure, but then within that there's a lot of variety and unexpected detailing and freedom, which is cool.
On voulait travailler non seulement avec la paille de riz de Camargue, mais aussi avec une mise en œuvre avec des gens qui sont politiquement impliqués en fait dans cette espèce de savoir-faire et de diffusion du savoir-faire. On a réuni les 3 chantiers d'insertion principaux de la région sur ce projet qui n'avaient jamais collaboré ensemble. Donc par exemple toutes ces histoires en fait humaines, elles sont importantes parce que c'est des relations qu'on crée aussi nous pour le futur.
Normally for these kind of buildings, maybe on the level of a private house, you have this with a client, but that is then a very special client-architect relation. But here, this kind of buildings with these kind of functions, workshops, laboratories, places for development, it's quite a mechanical approach normally. It means that it's handed over to almost not architects, but more to engineers that engineer you this environment in such a way that it's super efficient. And here we didn't do that. So, of course, we involved the engineering part. Not that we don't want that. We really believe that there is also know-how and knowledge there. It's really developed with possibilities in mind rather than excluding things and doing it in a mechanical, deterministic way.
The machine is really a tool. It's like the evolution of the Japanese trowel, which is the symbol of craftsmanship. But I think these types of machines, they start to become also tools of craftsmanship. So I don't think it's necessarily about the machine that defines everything. It's a lot about what people do with it.
You can say, oh, that's the end of the project, but it's a kind of constantly changing and evolving thing.
I started working with sunflower the first time in 2020. It's very flexible in what you can construct with it because it allows you, it's very easy to manipulate. On the other hand, the other problem that comes from it is the fact that it's quite soft and fragile. The sunflower panels for the building came as a need. Literally, Ludwig was starting to be developed, and we start questioning ourselves in the atelier, like what can we actually produce here that can be used in the new building. When you go from like exercise in atelier to architectural products, it's not just about amplifying the formula that you have to produce something, because every time that we change the scale, there is also things that need to adapt.
You know, almost no material element in a specific part is kind of critically important. You don't lose some kind of conceptual clarity if a material has to change. In a way, that's kind of the point. That is kind of fundamentally different to the way that I think lots of buildings are realised. You know, like if you go and speak to people in a quarry, the number of times people call up and say, I need a 25-metre piece of stone or some kind of length of stone that doesn't exist because natural materials don't come in these kind of totally, you know, sort of industrialised, standardised forms. And I think the idea of a sort of strategy for the building that has a kind of clear spatial logic, but actually the materials and things can somehow be sort of more responsive to availability, you know, has been actually quite successful. I think it was quite an ambiguous idea at the beginning and quite a difficult one to build with.
We have done or are doing projects of this kind of scale also, but the amount of, let's say, radical choices that were made towards biooriginal materials in a project of this scale was a first time for us. And it was really interesting, but it means you have to work on different fronts, on different materials at the same time. And there's a complexity in it that we also learned to do.
It's looking at building and construction as a performance, and you really design your performance in such a way that it inspires as much people you can.
souvent, on voit qu'il y a une dissociation parfois entre le monde et le moment où on construit et puis les gens qui vont après utiliser le bâtiment. Ici, il y a déjà quelque chose qui est une liaison entre ces deux univers, puisque nous, on construit des matériaux pour notre bâtiment. Donc on est déjà forcément en interaction avec les gens et les artisans qui vont les poser. Donc il y a déjà une porosité là qui se crée. Et ça, c'était important, du coup, d'avoir ce lien social, en fait, pour moi.
You have to work with liquidity, like the roughness of the fibers, how much of the sunflower pit you put inside so that it can pump through the machine. How do you spray, with which kind of spray heads? You make some holes in it so that it kind of becomes a flexible, that it allows for the material to pass through in the right way so that you have an even projected surface. So it's really the machine becomes an extension of what humans do and want and envision.
In terms of the finishes, it's not like there's necessarily a holistic view of what a space should look like. It's more that the process that we're going through is to allow research streams that are happening in the atelier to be able to develop, to kind of step up, to make a balustrade wrapping or to make a panel on the wall. So a lot of the time it's quite unexpected where we're going to get to. But in a way, the kind of whole image, the conception of the architect having an image of what it is going to be, doesn't really exist, because the one handrail will develop how it develops, and the panel that will develop how it develops, and the door handles will develop how they develop. And so in a way, only when the building starts to be inhabited will we know exactly what it's going to look like.
C'est quelque chose qui a été fait avec des centaines de personnes. C'est une espèce d'organisme vivant. Et donc de marquer ces relations-là, je trouve que c'est quelque chose de très joli, puisqu'on travaille ici à l'atelier avec le vivant.
But the main ideas will always be there, the first spatial grids and so on. So I'm very curious to see what's going to happen, because there's so much possible.
Le bâtiment lui-même est presque devenu un prototype. En tout cas, l'espace n'a pas été fait pour qu'il y ait des fonctions trop déterminées à chaque endroit. Même si chaque lieu a été programmé, de par ses techniques souvent, ses machines, ses extractions, ses accès à l'eau, la plupart des espaces sont faits pour pouvoir totalement évoluer dans le temps.
What's different about this building, or perhaps it's not that it's different, but it's just more acknowledged, is that the idea that a building is finished. When we conceived making this, it was the idea that it could help the atelier expand some of its ideas up to the scale of architecture, but also that it would become a testing ground, like it's a space to experiment. And in that respect, I think there was prototypes that were made for the building, but then, as Lawrence said, the building is also a prototype, or a kind of constant construction, continual construction. If we can continue this idea or thinking about the building as prototype, I think that would be really successful.
that it really becomes like a testing ground for new things, and it's not something that's seen as finished.
If you walk through the current building and blocks and spaces and you look around, you see so many stories. Each corner has a different story, has a different material, has a different process, was linked to a different workshop, and so on and so on. So if you look around, you are continuously faced with that reality of a multitude of languages and stories. I feel more as a student coming here than as an architect.
If you try and think about things in a certain sense, with a certain logic and a certain methodology, then you can have similar outcomes within this kind of, let's say, bioregional or sustainable approach to materials, to architecture, to design.
How can you make architecture whereby the space is very defined but the use is not? And I think what's interesting at the moment is that it's being used for stuff which we imagined, but there's also a future in which it's being used for stuff we didn't imagine.
The more time you spend with somebody, the more deeper you'll actually understand that relation, but also how you learn from it. It's really given us the time to learn from BC, to learn from Assemble, but also to learn from the different craftspeople that are involved in the project.
Everything was a step to learn out of. And I feel that with the whole team, it was also felt in that way. There was a kind of common drive to reach a type of process rather than a type of outcome.
For me, I think it's a general human feeling, the connection with the region, but we kind of always think that, okay, for infrastructure, it's not possible. You know, for infrastructure, we need to go with the concrete, with the steel, with industrial materials, and so on. So I hope that people reconnect with the possibilities, and also are touched by the poetics of building with bioregional materials.
Now at the end of the process, we sort of loosely describe as bioregional architecture. But when making architecture like this and on the scale, and perhaps for the first time, it is expected that there are certain challenges. It is kind of hard and requires a lot of human energy just to move beyond the kind of standardized ways of production. But then there is also the beauty and the connection with local landscapes and the local people that you're able to kind of take away from the whole project, which sort of makes these hard practicalities kind of worth it in the end. The more people that are able to carry that experience into their next projects and next projects will sort of little by little reduce those practicalities that are difficult within the project, because it's always the first prototype which is the most difficult, you know.
Thank you.